We can introduce ourselves. So I'm Anastasia, she, her, hers. I'm from Wilmington, Connecticut, but I now live in Boston, and I'm working on my master's in education, my educational specialist degrees from US Boston in school psychology, and I have a trans parent.
I'm Lila. I live in Columbus, Ohio, and we will see where I live next year for college. I'm a senior in high school, and I've been around Collage my whole entire life. And I have a trans dad and a queer mom.
My name's Olivia. I'm from Tucson, Arizona, but I live in Phoenix, Arizona. And this is a little old. I graduated last year from ASU with a degree in justice and social inquiry, and I currently work for a nonprofit, and I also have a trans parent.
Love to see it. So these are just some pictures of our families, just so you have a reference. I guess this is a picture of me and my mom who's trans. This was at like a scholarship I got. I thought it was very sweet.
Okay, my picture is me and my dad at Pride in Columbus, Ohio. Like, it was like, I don't know, 2019, I don't know. That was like one of the most recent pictures I could find. And obviously the sign, proud trans dad of a fantastic daughter, So that's in our garage.
Then this is me and my dad. This is when I was visiting her in Detroit, just us getting drinks and food.
So quick intro to Collage. Collage was founded in 1990 by a group of young people with LGBTQ parents who felt they needed to talk about their experiences like we often do in these groups. It was originally called Just for Us, and Collage was originally an acronym that stood for Children of Lesbians and Gays Everywhere. But obviously, we are in this group. We realize that there's more than that. So we just say Collage now because we want to be more inclusive of people with bi parents, trans parents, queer parents, everything else like that. It's the only organization by and for people with LGBTQ parents. And Family Week has been happening in Provincetown for over 25 years, and we're finally going back in person this year, so we're very excited. Living language, we don't have to go over this too much, but if you hear us say things like collager, that just means person with one or more LGBTQ plus parent or caregiver. We are all PGPs, so that's a person with a trans parent. And you may hear phrases like culturally queer or second gen or like things like that. But you can always ask us if you don't know what something means. So now we're just gonna do Q&A. You can type in the chat or just like, you can unmute yourselves or privately message us, like whatever works for like any questions that you have for us. These can just be questions about like what it was like growing up. I think it's interesting. We all are from very different parts of the country. But it could be things like transphobia, friends, advice, school, anything else. And if you're not sure if the question is appropriate, feel free to ask us anyway. Like the worst that happens is we'll just say like we're not comfortable answering that. Like we're not, gonna do anything. We always support education here. And stay tuned to the end and we will give a free guide that we just redid. We're launching our new guide that we have worked very hard on. We can give a little preview of it at the end too. And we have some pre-made questions also if people are like, I don't know what to ask. First question, how old were you when your parents first came out as trans? I'll let someone else go first.
I can go. My dad came out when I was 5, but I didn't find out until I was 6 when she began to transition. So yeah, pretty young because I am 22 now. So it's been for most of my life. She has been transitioned.
For I was born in like early 2000s, but my dad transitioned, I would say like late 80s or something. So my whole life, my dad has been a guy. But I think I found out when I was like 4 or 5, and I was like, okay, like I don't really know what this means, but have a nice life, like do what you want to do. So yes.
And I was 14 when my parent transitioned. So I was a little bit older. I was in high school, which I think is definitely an experience.
I always like the question of what we call our parents, because I think for you and me, Anastasia, we definitely have stories of what we call our parents.
Yeah, you didn't go first.
Sure. So, my dad, she transitioned. My dad is also Mexican. So, when she was transitioning, obviously there was a lot, it was in the early 2000s. So, not a lot of information about what being trans meant, and like no one understood. And so I was also really afraid growing up of like the ridicule towards her and then also me by proxy. So I, instead of like calling her dad, I call her papi, which is like Spanish for dad, because I was like, oh, no one will know what I'm saying, which is obviously like doesn't make any sense because I'm from Arizona and I went to like schools with majority Latino population, so it's like everyone knew what I meant when I was saying it, but in my mind I was like, oh, I'm being super slick and sly on like going under the radar.
Yeah, and I call my parent Mem, which she chose for herself, because so my grandmother, like her mom, um, died really, really young, when Mem was 24. And so we never got to meet her, but we would have called her Mimir, which is like the French like word for grandmother. Um, so she took the shortened version of that, and so we call her Mem, as a way of like kind of honoring my grandma, which I think is really sweet. I feel like another kind of interesting one is always like holidays and like what you celebrate as far as like Mother's Day, Father's Day.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an issue that comes up a lot, is because like it within like the PTP community, because I don't know, like I still refer to my dad as dad, but she is a woman. So I think it's definitely like a very personal decision between like your parent and you and like what they want is best. But my dad, she's always said like, yeah, I'm still your dad. Like you can call me, like we celebrate Father's Day and stuff like that. So that's how my family does it. But obviously everyone's very different. So
For me, my family just looked like average American suburb family. So I just was like, oh, dad, Father's Day, and then mom, Mother's Day.
I know, like for me, I think just like my parent came out when I was a little bit older, and it was definitely a little bit uncomfortable the first year that she was starting to transition, because I was like, I don't like, we didn't talk about, we talked about a lot of stuff, but we just didn't think to talk about like Mother's and Father's Day. And I remember being like, it was just so, I was like, I don't know, like, should I get her something for Mother's Day? Like, I had a weird relationship with my biological mom, so that was just a weird day for me anyway. And then I was like, well, maybe we can do like Parents' Day or something. And then it just ended up feeling weird. And so now I just celebrate Mother's Day. Um, and I just celebrate it a bunch of times. um, yeah, it really just is something. It's like it depends on your family and really just like what works best for you. Um, how do like we talk to other people about our families?
I can go first. Okay, so growing up, I would, again, my family looked like the average family. So I would just kind of like play it out and like try to see how people grew up and how knowledgeable they were about the subject of any of the things in LGBTQ plus. So I like just kind of kept it to myself, and then whenever I felt comfortable, I would like be like, oh hey, like, oh yeah, like my dad's trans, or like, oh yeah, my mom's queer, and that kind of thing. But then this past year, it definitely flipped to the opposite because my dad um, ran for school board where I live. And so that kind of threw that whole thing out the window a little bit for me. So we definitely had have a lot of conversations of like I was comfortable with it, and like we kind of during the campaign made it be like oh yeah, like I'm just a dad, like, oh yeah, I just happen to be trans, but like here's like the issues kind of thing, which I enjoyed because then, people at my school, I don't know their lives, I don't know their opinions. Because again, it's high school and like you still care about what people think of you. And so obviously, like the bad and the hard parts of how you tell people because like um at our school for our announcements they do like stories on people, and what they told me was that they were going to do a story about my dad and what his philosophies are, who he is. He has a daughter in the school, but I learned 5 minutes before it got aired, it was going to be, oh, here's like Dion Manley, and he's the first transgender person voted in Ohio. It's like, okay, outing myself to almost 3,000 people. Cool. So it kind of just like, it's just you just have to keep the conversations going.
Mhm.
And so luckily, no one told me to my face anything, and now I haven't heard anything. So they've been very supportive, which I've been grateful for. So yeah.
I definitely tell people in a different way now than when I was younger, just because I think I understand things a lot more. I have a lot more of the language, and I think it definitely is like context dependent. So like I most of my friends are queer, like I'm queer, like when I'm in like those kinds of environments, it's like, guess what? Like I have a fun fact about my family and everyone is really excited about it. And like so many of my friends are like, yeah, Mem has adopted me. Like so like it's very different. But then like I also like I work in the school system and that is definitely a place. This is something I've been wrestling with, honestly, a lot, is that school systems in general are a lot more conservative just as a system. And there's always it's kind of like repeating the same fears that I felt when I was in school. Like I don't if I talk to a kid about my family, like, are they going to go home and tell their parents and their parents are going to complain? And then is this going to become like a whole thing? Especially because like I work with like elementary school students. So a lot of the times like I'll say like I have two moms, which like I do, but I won't get more into it than that. Like my coworkers at my school, like, no, I have two moms. Um, if anyone like asks, like I'll always like tell them, or like if they ask like more about my family, I'm always like honest about it. Um, but it's hard. Like I wish I could just be really open about it. I like to use it as like a platform to advocate. And I think especially with like when you are working with kids, it's important for them to know about diverse family structures. So it's definitely hard, especially if you have like a lot of like a big like religious population or like things like that. Um, it's kind of hard to balance. Like I never am ashamed of my family, but the world that we live in has different levels of safety, and that's really hard to kind of balance. But
Yeah, I'm kind of the same as Anastasia. I definitely addressed it a lot differently when I was younger versus now. Um, when I was younger, I feel like I just kind of tried to avoid it as much as I could. And like, I didn't want people coming over to my house when my parents were still together. Because I was like, this is some whole other thing to like explain. So I would just kind of like avoid it. And I would say dad, like my dad, but then I would just not use any like gendered terms besides that. I just wouldn't say like her pronouns or anything, just to be like, okay, I am talking about her, but like I guess they just have a different vision than what I'm talking about in mind. And now, yeah, it's like, again, it's totally like Anastasia again said, contextual, because also, I don't know, I feel like people who have like cis parents, like they're not constantly just like talking about your parents and like who they are. So it's like so hard to like want to bring like I don't know bring it up. It's like it just feels so random because it is like a very big thing and big part of my life, but also it's like, why am I disclosing this information, like whatever. But yeah, like my friends know, and I'll just and if I tell someone, or like I'm telling a story and I'll be like, oh, my dad, she, like I'll say my dad, she, and then I'll be like, oh, my dad's trans, and keep moving on. If I've like deemed that they're cool people and like not gonna have much judgment or bias or something, then I just continue on with the story. But yeah, luckily I think the tides are definitely shifting a little bit, where it's becoming much more accepted to be trans, but also at the same time not. So it's like very weird. More, maybe it's just maybe the phrase is that there's just more visibility of trans people. So like the mainstream knows that they exist. Whereas before, I think while I was growing up, there wasn't anything. So yeah, not to say that it's any easier for trans people, because I mean, we know what's going on in the world. So yeah.
No, I definitely agree with that. Like I don't think I have the language really to explain even, and people didn't know. Like I remember I couldn't even like explain to some of my friends, because that was just so out of their, and it's like crazy because like queer people have existed, trans people have existed for all of time, but it does make it, yeah, I think easier in that sense. Now it's like at least I can say trans and people know what I'm saying.
Yeah, like there's a frame of reference. Like we have really awesome like athletes and actors and activists that like you can think of immediately. So that's a lot nicer to have.
This is a good question. I have very strong opinions on this. So we have a question that says, did any of you see the show Transparent, and what did you think?
You can go ahead.
I can. Okay. So I actually watched an episode of this show in my GSA in high school. I don't like it. Besides, yeah, the assault allegations and stuff with the main actor, I don't like cis actors playing trans people. I think that's just really, there's so many trans actors that exist, first of all, that could have used that. And I think a lot of it was like, I'm glad that kind of representation is becoming more prevalent. So like in that sense, but to me, I wish that it would have been a trans person, because that's the kind of representation that I want to see. And I don't want the representation of my parent to be, this is a male actor like pretending to be a woman, because that's just not what it is. And I think it really misrepresents the community. I think a lot of the family dynamics of it were like relevant, like, you know, there's always a lot going on, but I just think it's just so important to have real representation.
It just makes the message like almost meaningless. Like when you have, and especially when you have an actor like Jeffrey Tambor, who's like a horrible person. So it's like, why are we doing this? I work part-time at a theater, and last week we had the musical Tootsie, and that was like a really big thing, like me and my friends were talking about, because obviously Tootsie is a movie from like the 1980s, and basically the whole premise around it is like this guy, he can't get a job, but then he finds out that there's a job for like a woman, and so he basically just dresses up in drag and is able to like exploit being a woman to further his means in his career and stuff like that. And so that was in the 80s. It's not excusable, but like it happened. So whatever. But this musical was made in like 2018 or something, and I'm like, why are we doing this? There's so many more cool, interesting stories out there. So it's like, why are trans people still the butt of the joke? And like, oh, it's a man in women's clothing. Like, it's because it just feels like a farce.
That's the thing. It just becomes like a shared transphobic joke with the audience. And it's like, don't do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was thinking about this the other day, because there's a lot more representation about people who have two moms and two dads, like we've never seen before. Like it's really exciting. Like every time like I see anything on TV, I'm like, what? But so I'm hoping like having more trans parents and like trans families is gonna kind of be the next thing we'll see more of, and better representation.
Yeah, because there are really awesome shows and movies and stuff that show the trans experience from different points of view, you know, like Pose, There's a really awesome movie called Tangerine about trans sex workers. Like, there's just like awesome, there's really great stuff out there. It's just so few and far in between. That's just like, I want more, please.
I was literally watching an episode. There's this kid show called Craig of the Creek, and they just introduced a non-binary character. And I was
So
like,
exciting.
what? It's like, I love this so much. Like, I just get so excited every time. We have, would you consider the children on Pose to be collagers? I never watched season 2, so.
Oh,
I've never.
you've never seen Pose?
No.
I think I've watched, how many seasons are there now? I don't know. I've watched most of them, maybe just not the newest. That's a good question, because I think that's something that comes up a lot in like collager spaces and like LGBTQ plus spaces, is like the notion of chosen family. I can't speak on that because I'm not queer, so that's different for like actual queer people. But it kind of makes sense for them to be collagers, because it's like these house mothers really do take care of these children and guide them through their lives and feed them, house them, like give them their glory at the balls and stuff like that. So honestly, I've never thought of it that way, but that totally makes sense, because yeah, I think whoever you choose for your parents to be in that sense, it's like, yeah, confirmed the Pose children are collagers.
Even just like, I don't know, like there's so many of my friends that like my parent has just taken in that are trans, and like I have a lot of friends where it's like, no, their family's not accepting, and she'll be like, okay, they're coming over for dinner. Like like just very like, I'm your mom now. And I think that it really does happen like all the time. So like I don't see why not. I think it's super valid. Like that's who's like an influential person to you. We have a question about like how we feel connected to like the trans community.
I think when I was young, my dad, she's also a chef. And so there was a trans youth shelter here in town, and that was like kind of my first experience of like just the LGBT like world, because like we would go and we would bring like food for these kids who, like, some of them were not that much older than me at the time. Like I was probably like 8 or 9, and these kids, some of them were like 12, 13, you know, like really not that old, but obviously had hardships with like their families and were no longer connected with them. And so that was like really eye-opening to see. And yeah, I think it's hard because I feel like, I don't know, I feel like, because Collage like LGBTQ plus structure, so it's like, obviously I know they exist, but it's so hard because like we said, like disclosing things about your familial life is obviously difficult. But I just had never met anyone until like I met Anastasia and Lila and stuff like that. So I don't know. I feel like it's so hard. Also being like straight, it's also harder to feel like I belong in these spaces because I'm not trans and I'm not queer. So, and I don't want to be like walking in and like taking up space that is not meant for me. So I just on the side support and whatever, instead of being an ally, being an accomplice, and support in whatever ways that are needed. But yeah, I don't know. Anyone else has a better answer?
I mean, I definitely feel very connected, just like the nature of my family and my own identity and the people that I'm around. My mom is like very much an activist, so it's just, I don't know, it's just very much like we would always be at rallies and protests, and I would see her speaking and going to Pride and like all of those things. And to me, like it's just so important to have that community. And I agree, like what like Olivia said, like I obviously never want to overstep or be like, I can understand your experiences, because things like transition and identity are very personal experiences, and that's just not something that you can understand unless that is your identity. But I definitely feel like my mom is extremely open about like her transition and is always like, share anything you want. Like, it's helping people learn. So I definitely say I feel close to the trans community. I've gone to Trans Day of Remembrance, And that's something I think about too, because to me, anytime I see something like that happen to a trans person, I see it as happening to my mom. And so in that way, like I feel very much like the trans community is my family, and it's a very important community to me. And I like Olivia said, like I want to be able to advocate in any way that I can.
I think for me, like because when you first said like the question like how do you feel like connected to like the trans community, I was like I don't know, but then like when I was hearing you guys talk stuff, I was like my whole life I've been surrounded by collage, so like literally when I was like one, like already around, like I don't even know, but I've always been around collage. I'm like, oh yeah, like it's just part of my life, so I don't really think of like going to rallies or like supporting other people. I don't really think of it as like connected to the trans community. I kind of just am like, oh yeah, like this is just part of my life. Like I don't like, yeah. And again, like how you guys are both saying, like you don't want to like overstep of like where or like where your place is in it all. But I definitely just feel like because I've grown up around it my whole life, like I'm like, okay, this is my life. Like, I'm not, I don't know, like actually trying to connect. It just kind of happens that I am connecting like with the community. Yeah.
That's a good point though. Like that's the thing, like our families are normal to us. Like I feel like
Hmm.
right, like at this point we're just like, no, that's just how my family is, right? Like that's such a good point. Like
Yeah.
there's so much like we only really think about it when like other people are asking, I guess.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's
like
like, isn't this normal for you too? Like,
yeah.
Should we do like one more question and then maybe
Yeah.
show off our guide
Should we do end with what's your favorite thing?
about our parent or
Yeah, about just like having a transparent, or I guess you can do it about our parent.
my favorite thing about having a transparent. I don't know, she's awesome. Definitely it gives me a better outlook. Just I don't know, her tenacity and like strength of life is like very encouraging because she transitioned so much later in her own life and is now like an elder. It's like very cool to see that, and also just to know like I don't know, I can't speak for her, but just assuming she's probably like much more at peace with herself now that like she's living her life. Um, and also my dad, she's a really great cook. I don't know. I really like her food. So that's one thing that I like about her.
okay, like my favorite thing, I guess. I think like for me, like at this stage of my life right now is like it's kind of like a flex to have an LGBTQ plus parent at school. Like because my dad's trans and then my best friend's stepmom is trans. So I'm like, yeah, like, don't you guys know? Like, yeah, like my dad's trans, like, didn't you know? So it's like kind of just a fun little like it's fun surprising people too. Like, I don't know. Um, but I think too, like over this past year, I guess, it's been like very fun and interesting and gives me a new outlook on like how much work and how much just being your true authentic self and being in positions of power and how people face and how much strength you have to get to like go through it all.
I definitely agree with both of you, and just like the strength that it takes. And I think about my mom had a really, really hard life. She really, really struggled and has continued to struggle with a lot of things because of the transphobia that she's had to face, and is still the most badass person I know, and has always just been so encouraging to me and always been my number one fan. And I really do admire her, and I've definitely learned a lot from her as far as, radical acceptance and you know, making sure we're being as inclusive, as equitable as possible, really listening to people's stories, you know, having everyone is family. And I think that's a wonderful thing, and I'm so grateful to people that have her.
So what we are previewing today, or I guess sharing for the first time, is back in 2008, the People with Transparence team wrote a resource guide for people with transparence, and to help kind of guide the children and also the parents as well of through the transition of like, what happens when your parent transitions? Like, what do you call them? What's going to happen? So that was written in 2008. And it had not been updated since 2008. So we took on the task of updating it. And so now I get to share for the first time this really beautiful guide. I'll bring it up on my screen really quick. This really beautiful guide that we have now. So we have a little note there that y'all can read, but we also have table of contents. So it's like glossary of terms, like frequently asked questions for when your parent transitions, also things that happen within the family. A lot of, you know, sometimes your parents don't stay together, all those kinds of things, transphobia, all kinds of things like that. So yeah, this is a really beautiful guide that now has been updated and has a lot more, it's more true to the world that we're living in currently, which is really nice. But we are going to send out a copy of it to y'all so that you can have it. Yeah, I don't know if Lila or Anastasia have anything else that you want to say about it.
We're just really excited to share with everybody. I think that's it. If anyone has any last minute questions, you can feel free to email our team. So pgsupport@collage.org is our email address. Any one of us will be able to see that and answer any other questions, comments, concerns. You can also always go to collage.org for more information, and I believe the guide will eventually be available through there somehow. Social media, Collage National, and we hope to hear from you all soon. Thank you guys so much for coming out.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.